Good. Good evening. We are going to be covering American imperialism this evening, and I wanted to go over the various components of American imperialism with you. Again, this is coming from the Give Me Liberty from Eric Foner. Chapter 17. So this refers to America's freedom at home and abroad. So one of the things that's going to come up in this unit, the populist challenge, the segregated South, the redrawing of boundaries, and America becoming a world power. And when we think about this time period, this is going to be a time period in which the United States is going to be seeing itself as essentially being in a position in which they are essentially in a parental role to other territories in the rest of the world. So if we look at this political cartoon from this time period, we have Uncle Sam presented here with his companion of Columbia, always the female embodiment of the American ideal, as essentially prospective parents outside this orphanage. Inside, we have the Mexican Cession portrayed here, territory that the United States has already acquired. We have the Texas territory. We have our Native American representing the native lands. And then, of course, the California territory. These are already our happily adopted children, quote unquote, that the United States has given asylum to, meaning territory that the U.S. has taken in. Now they're eyeing up these new prospective, quote unquote, children that they'd like to acquire. And Colombia is looking at them as potential children that she'd like to take in. And these wailing babies that are being shown to her in the arms of manifest destiny, this idea that the U.S. should extend by God's grace, because that's literally where the concept of manifest destiny comes from, includes Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines. And notice how each wailing baby is waiting for the United States to snatch them up and be cared for. Now, what's really kind of galling about this political cartoon is the fact that none of these places, none of these children are actually children in real life. Hawaii was its own independent monarchy that existed long before the United States existed. The Philippines had a long and rich culture prior to involvement with the United States and had been a colonial possession of Spain and wanted its own independence. And the idea that the United States would come along and snatch it was galling. Cuba also was a colonial possession of Spain and was not necessarily waiting for the United States to snatch it up and make it a part of the United States. Nor was Puerto Rico. The idea that the United States was this parental figure and infantilizing these other cultures was wildly insulting. So then we come to the issue of what is populism? What's the origins and significance of populism? And that's where we need to start off. So, where do we get the origins of populism? Well, like workers, farmers in the South and West faced growing economic insecurity as agricultural prices fell and economic dependence on merchants and banks increased. Now, we've already discussed in the previous sections, sharecropping kept millions of black and white Southern farmers in poverty. And as world cotton was being oversupplied, cotton from the economic markets in Egypt, India, was suddenly mass producing and competing with American cotton, we're seeing a dramatic price decrease that is going to threaten the Southern farmers' livelihoods and property. Now, many of these farmers are going to blame their woes on issues here at home, particularly the high freight rates that they were being charged here, as well as high interest rate loans from bankers and merchants. That's not to say that these were not a key part of their challenges here at home. The fiscal policies of the federal government were also making it incredibly challenging for them to be able to pay their bills. Because one of the things that was incredibly challenging was the fact that they were being expected to pay their loans back in ways that they just did not have the financial means to be able to do so. Many farmers are going to organize into alliances. The Farmers Alliance in Texas in the late 1870s is going to spread to other states. The alliance at first is going to stay away from politics and is going to establish cooperatives and things that are referred to as exchanges to finance and market crops. Essentially, these are going to be a means for groups of farmers to exchange crops with one another to maintain a means of being able to exchange their crops in an open market type of situation, and then being able to exchange these things almost in like a bartering type of situation. The problem is when banks refuse to loan money for these exchanges, the alliance is going to propose a sub treasury plan. The federal government would establish warehouses where the farmers could store their crops until they were sold. And by using the crops as collateral, the government would issue loans directly to farmers at low interest rates, ending their dependence on bankers and merchants for credit. As this leads to more demands for this to be an official plan recognized on a federal level, this is going to lead to a more direct plan for a political stance and a political party. Thus, in the early 1890s, we're going to see the alliance forming the People's Party. This will eventually be called the Populists. This is going to be essentially referred to as a political insurgency. The populists are appealing not just to farmers, but to all people that are essentially seen as the producers in our new industrialized world. So, miners, industrial workers, small businessmen. But most of the people that are going to be largely a part of the People's Party or the populists are going to be people working within the cotton production, wheat farmers in the South and West. Populists organize massive education campaigns using pamphlets, newspapers, and revival-style mass meetings. So very similar to like an evangelical style message or campaign. And this was the very much the idea that as small producers, your means of individual ownership of productive property and dignity of labor came from your means to control your source of income and wealth through having a direct connection between what you made and what you were able to produce from start to finish, and having a true value to what you end up creating at the end. But the populists were also very much connected to several big topic issues. The populists were forward looking in terms of they embraced scientific methods of agriculture and modern technologies that made large scale cooperatives in terms of farming possible. They very much were pro railroad and telegraph. They believed in a national market for the buying and selling of goods. They wanted the federal government to regulate them for the public interest, which is pretty modern in comparison to how they were often portrayed as being kind of like hicks and backwoods thinking. Now, as we move forward in looking at the populists moving forward, the populist platform is going to be one that will be a bit challenging to kind of put into one category, because the populist platform is going to be one that is going to be focused on ordinary Americans. It will have a lot of things that we kind of take for granted as a part of American society today. And a lot of that is because what the populists put forward as a key component of modern elections, modern electoral society today, comes from the populists. Even though a lot of what goes on during this period is going to get a lot of pushback from people during this time period. So, what do the populists put forward? They put forward the concept of direct election of U.S. senators, government control of U.S. currency, a graduated income tax, low-cost public financing to farmers, workers' rights to be able to organize into unions. They also wanted there to be national ownership of railroads to allow farmers an inexpensive way to get their crops to market. And in some parts of the South, the populists also tried to unite Black and white farmers on common political and economic programs. This did not work out so well because, racism. And this is where we see the populist platform fracture incredibly. And populists were unable to get white and Black farmers to be able to come together. And this had a lot to do with the fact that there was just an inability to be able to get there to be a way past the inherent racism in the South. Black farmers formed their own Cotton Farmer Alliance, whose strikes were suppressed by white authorities, while even those that were sympathetic were unable to get past some of the hardcore racist practices of the Democrats within the South. So just a reminder that it is during this time period that the Democrats in the South were your hardcore, super racist party in the South. Now, there was a lot of hostility that was taking place, and we see populists also engaged in reform efforts to try to get middle-class women and endorse women's suffrage in many states. In 1892, we see that the populist candidate for president, James Weaver, won more than 1 million votes, and the party carried 5 western states and elected 3 governors and 15 members of Congress. So it does get a significant amount of people participating. It just is not able to carry the significance of the group. So let's see if we can get our next segment up. And it looks like we will need to pause here.